Hi everyone, my name's Owen, and today I'm presenting my credit brief on Intel Corporation, and specifically why I believe the market dramatically mispriced Intel's default risk in 2025. The core thesis is simple. The United States government effectively chose Intel as a strategic domestic semiconductor vehicle. This stopped being a normal turnaround story once sovereign and strategic capital started entering the company. At Intel's low in April 2025, the market was pricing a near-terminal decline scenario. The stock had collapsed to levels not seen since 1997, and investors had lost confidence in the foundry strategy. And furthermore, management credibility was damaged. But within months, the US government and NVIDIA, SoftBank, Microsoft, and Apple all committed strategic capital to partnerships with Intel. That changed the credit story entirely. What makes Intel different is that this stopped being just a company story and became a geopolitical one. Right now, the global semiconductor supply is heavily concentrated in Taiwan, primarily through Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. That creates a major strategic vulnerability for the US because advanced chips power everything from AI infrastructure to defense systems and military technology. If tensions between China and Taiwan escalate, the US can't afford to rely almost entirely on overseas fab capability. That's why Intel matters. Intel is currently the only US company attempting to build leading edge logic and semiconductor manufacturing at scale on American soil. The market originally viewed Intel's foundry spending as excessive and risky, but Washington increasingly viewed it as strategically necessary. The clearest evidence came in 2025 in August, when the US government took a nearly 10% stake in Intel and attached a 5-year warrant tied to maintaining majority foundry ownership. This slide captures how quickly catalysts can form and how sentiment can change. Moving on from the geopolitical points, Intel's stock price in early 2025 was at a 30-year low. But within roughly 9 months, Intel raised $15.9 billion in equity capital and $6.5 billion in new debt, largely long-term. This matters because markets generally don't lend money 40 years to companies that they think have serious default risk. So while equity investors were focused on execution concerns, the debt markets were signaling growth confidence in Intel's survivability. As you can see, this is not your average turnaround story. It's a coordinated industrial policy outcome. Now, on to probably the most important part of all of this. In mid-2025, Intel's default risk was about 0.6% on the 1-year time frame. By May 2026, it was 0.05%. That's an enormous change in perceived default risk in less than a year. What's important, though, is that all of this happened while they still have profitability and leverage issues. Now, this isn't a traditional balance sheet recovery, but what changed is the market's confidence in Intel's ability to survive and refinance. Why? Because the model began pricing in 3 things. First, massive external capital support. They have nearly $16 billion in new equity capital. Second, strategic partnership with the US government, NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft. And third, successful access to long-term debt markets through April 2026 bond issuance. So the market is basically concluding that Intel may still struggle operationally, but the probability of a near-term liquidity crisis or bankruptcy dropped dramatically because too many powerful entities have now entered the scene. The interesting part is that not everyone agrees yet. Intel still has some weak profitability. It has negative EBIT, high leverage, and major execution risk around the foundry business. If this were just a normal turnaround story, the skepticism would make complete sense. But I think that the market started realizing that this is no longer just a normal credit story. The United States has too much strategically tied to domestic semiconductor production for Intel just to simply collapse during this transition period. Now, this doesn't mean that Intel's guaranteed to become dominant again. It just means that the probability of outright failure changed materially once the government, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Apple all became financially and strategically involved. And I think the bond market reflected that shift much faster than the rating agencies did. This makes sense because rating agencies' ratings are usually backward-looking. My recommendation to the fixed income team is that they buy Intel's long-term corporate bonds for 30 and 40 years. They have high interest rates, and the company is strongly backed by the US and other corporate entities. Risks to consider are the earnings and profitability issues, the foundry execution, and especially a political change. If the US government has an administration change or policy reversal, this can be deadly for the trade. But what's fixed is these major issues here. There's much more liquidity and solvency. The April 2026 bond sale went very smoothly, and the US government has a 10% stake in this, so they have skin in the game. Thank you very much.